So, Warwick, we just finished our interview with Kevin Eikenberry, the author of a new book called Flexible Leadership, and it was a different kind of episode for us in the sense that it wasn't about a personal crucible he's been through. It wasn't all about his perspective on crucibles, but there was a lot of information in the discussion that can be applied to any of our listeners and viewers who have gone through crucibles. So, I mean, what was your takeaway, your number one takeaway from our time with Kevin?
Yeah, it's a great question, Gary. I would say that life and leadership is about paradoxes, about both and contrast. One of the things he spoke about that, your worst day is indeed your worst day, irrespective of the kind of crucible that you've been through, is a horrific, painful circumstance that likely in some sense might last your whole life. You might find a way to get beyond it, but the scars will likely remain. You might be triggered from time to time, depending on what happens. So yes, it is your worst day. But on the other hand, as many of our guests have said, blessing has come from their crucible. They're even thankful in some ways. So how can it be your worst day, something you would never wish on another human being, but also be something that you're grateful for and there's a blessing? Well, life is about paradoxes. Life is really one or the other. It's both and. So whether it's in life or leadership, we need to be less about the extremes, but realize life can be both and. So one of the other metaphors that Kevin used was about a tree, or a branch. I mean, it's pliant. It can move, but yet it's also firmly grounded. So really, this was a discussion about paradox. And certainly, I would say, what is the chief paradox when you think of Beyond the Crucible? It's the fact that your worst day is incredibly painful. It forever changed your life, but yet there may be a blessing or even some gratitude that comes out of your worst day. That is, I'd say, maybe the biggest paradox in what we talk about at Beyond the Crucible.
So one of the things that he talked about, and I'd never really expressed it in this way, we talk a lot, have since the beginning of the podcast, the beginning of Beyond the Crucible, when it was still Crucible Leadership, we've talked about you can learn lessons from your crucible and the importance of learning lessons from your crucible. But he added in explicitly, it's not just learning lessons. It's also a crucible can create new experiences for you to pursue. And we certainly had guests who've talked about that, talked around that, gotten to that, but I've never heard it expressed from us that way. Your crucible can give you experiences that you wouldn't have otherwise had if it wasn't for the crucible. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think in my own story, I had several experiences that I had my version of truth about what my parents thought, how the company was being run and not being run well, and straying from the values and the vision of the founder. Then there was another truth by some other family members that thought that things were going fine. And so it's easy to think that your truth is truth, but that experience taught me, you see truth. I'm not really talking about absolute truth, but in terms of a version of events, you see it through your lens, but there are other lenses. So that experience has changed the way I look at leadership as well as at life. Certainly, that experience was very painful that I went through, but it taught me kind of what's important, which is not so much success, but significance. It taught me about the value of people and just how painful it was to me. It gave me, I think, a degree of empathy for other people's experiences and other people's stories. So I wouldn't be who I am now without those experiences. And I would say everybody we've ever had on the podcast, you could say it's not just the crucible, but the experiences that they went through has made them a different person. You can use those experiences as lessons to help you be a better person, help you have a calling that you never would have otherwise. So, we're shaped by our genetics, but we're also shaped by the sum total of our experiences. Both are true.
And one of the things in the book that really, sort of caught your attention was his talk about flexors. right? The yin and yang of some things. The one that he pulled out that was the most meaningful to him was between compliance and commitment, right? The tensions between that. How do you deal with that? And he talked about how when you lean into commitment, when that's your first foot forward, maybe, that is the path to a life of significance. Compliance, there's time for that. You guys talked about the time for that. I'll let you talk about what times for that you mentioned in the show. Why did the concept of flexors arrest your attention so much? And how in particular does this idea of compliance and commitment speak to a crucible experience and an aftermath of a crucible experience?
I think very often we tend to lead or live from a certain perspective. Hey, I'm a servant leader. I'm a go-to, get it done, maybe military type of leader. I'm a consensus builder. We have our favorite styles, almost like a favorite shirt or favorite pair of shoes, and that's great. But in life, you need to be flexible, especially coming back from a crucible. I mean, things are going to be very challenging, and you need to be flexible about how you live and lead, personally and professionally. Even like one of the flexes he talked about later was truth and grace, which from a faith-based perspective, I'm very familiar with. More broadly, you could say, okay, you need to perform, and, if you don't buckle up, you're out of here. And that can be appropriate. On the other hand, there can be times when grace is important. Maybe there are things going on in somebody's life. And so truth and grace, they're both important, but what do you use? It really depends on the situation. Obviously, for me, I tend to lean towards grace and forgiveness, but truth is important too. So when he mentioned compliance versus commitment, yes, you want your whole team to be committed to the vision you have, that in our world, we want people to lead lives of significance, lives on purpose, dedicated to serving others. Commitment's important, but at the end of the day, things have got to get done.